Welcome to More Than a Conversation, the podcast where we meet and have discussions with some of the most interesting people and innovative leaders in their fields from all walks of life. We will be discussing everything from politics to theology to religion to philosophy to life. Every once in a while, I may just be on here talking about whatever's in the news and whatever I think will be of interest to you. This is your host, Patrick Connolly, and I hope that today will be more than a conversation for you. Today will be a behind-the-scenes look at what it's like having these conversations that all of you have been tuning into and downloading, and wanted to give you an opportunity today to drop in with any questions. But today on More Than a Conversation, I am joined by Dr. Fazale Rana. Now, he's affectionately known as Fuzz throughout the Reasons to Believe community. He's written many books, lots of work, some of which you have probably heard of or heard referenced. All sorts of great information coming out of him and all the folks over there at Reasons to Believe. But Dr. Rana himself is the Vice President of Research and Apologetics at Reasons to Believe. He is the author of many groundbreaking books, including Who Was Adam?, Creating Life in the Lab, The Cell's Design, and Humans 2.0. He holds a PhD in chemistry with an emphasis in biochemistry from Ohio University. Dr. Rana, it is so good to have you on today. Thank you for joining me on More Than a Conversation.
Well, thanks for having me, Pat.
Now, we were talking briefly before we went live about the fact, and we start More Than a Conversation, we kind of have a portion where we do the origin story. And I was talking to you because I'd noticed that you were from West Virginia. Now, right now, you're doing groundbreaking research. You are a voice in the Christian community, all those things. But tell us, where did the story begin? You're not a first generation researcher, it seems.
No, well, I grew up, as you point out, in West Virginia, and had a bit of an unusual upbringing. My father was a Muslim. He was a devout Muslim, and my mom came from a Catholic background. She was a non-practicing Catholic when they married. And so I grew up in a home where the primary religious focus was on Islam. And in fact, I even dabbled in Islam a little bit when I was a teenager, really exploring, and in effect became an agnostic as I graduated high school and went off to college, and embraced the evolutionary paradigm and evolutionary worldview really as an undergraduate student. It was really graduate school that convinced me there must be a creator, just because of the elegant design and sophistication and ingenuity of biochemical systems. And once I realized that life itself must come from a mind, I began to wonder, who is that mind? How do I relate to that mind? And it was the Christian faith that really made the most sense to me. So it was really science that paved the way to my conversion to Christianity. I didn't have any kind of real exposure to Christianity again growing up whatsoever.
So you kind of did it backwards, it sounds like. We have so often, for so long, the church has had this idea that somehow science was against the church, and the more exposure to the sciences, particularly the physical sciences, the biochemistries, might lead someone away from the faith. But for you, it was the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it wasn't that I was seeking evidence for God through scientific discovery. It was, I was, again, an agnostic, looking to earn a PhD in biochemistry, with really my goal being to pursue a career in research, as a biochemist. And it was really, the God revealed through the record of nature that caught my attention, and, really began to, compel me to ask, again, these more theological and spiritual questions. Yeah. So, for me, I've never seen conflict between science and faith. I've never seen science as a threat to faith, because, Yeah, and the more that I learn, as a scientist about the world around me, the more that I learn about the insights from other scientific disciplines, the more I see just really compelling reasons to believe, that there must be a mind behind all of this. And the best match between the scientific evidence and, who or the identity of that creator really is the God described in the Bible.
When you first started down that journey, and we're going to talk about Elon Musk and Neuralink and all those things, but I am curious, when you first started on that journey and you go, man, there's something deeper happening here. Did you have a coworker? Was there some campus group? You said you were doing graduate work, I believe. Was there? How did you begin to walk out the theological side of your faith, having been raised with an Islamic background?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I, again, had no real exposure to Christianity. My greatest exposure was to Islam. And I began to reason that if there really is a creator, maybe the different religions of the world were just different ways that this creator tried to communicate to people, reached out to people, if you will. And so I was going down a path of universalism. And if you know anything about Islamic theology, there is kind of a type of universalism that's part of Islam, where the view is that, look, Muhammad is the seal of the prophets, but prior to Muhammad, there were other prophets, like Jesus is viewed as a prophet, Moses, Noah, Abraham, David, and these were particular prophets to particular people at particular time, where Muhammad is the seal of the prophets. But in Islam, there's this embrace really of other religious perspectives of sorts, so there's a type of a universalism. And I imagine my exposure to that thinking partly shaped, my view that it was universalism. And it was actually the woman who I was engaged to, who later became my wife, who had a rededication of her life to Christ while we were engaged. And she began to share with me her faith. And I can remember telling her, look, that's fine if that's what you want to do. I don't think I'm really interested in Christianity. And I even told her at one point, I don't know that I could become a Christian because I'm a scientist. I don't see how I could do that. So even then, I kind of had it embedded in my thinking that there was this endemic conflict. And yet it was really through the challenge of her pastor to read the Bible and really determine myself if it was true, not just simply dismiss it without any knowledge of it, that really opened me up to the truth of Christianity. Because as I began to read scripture, I was deeply impressed with the difference between the Old and the New Testament, and between the Quran, where the Quran is very esoteric, hard to make sense of, it's disorganized in its presentation, whereas there's a narrative, a clear narrative that's being described in scripture that's very easy to track with. And so it was really reading through the Sermon on the Mount that convicted me of my sin and helped me to really see Jesus as who Christians claimed him to be. And so it was really spending time reading through the word that drew me to Christianity. And I can remember going back and reading Genesis 1 through that process, and actually being impressed with how remarkably accurate Genesis 1 was as a scientific account, particularly if you understood day as a period of time. It's like, wow, this matches the scientific record. It's remarkable. So that, I don't know that was what convinced me Christianity was true, but it helped me to recognize that there wasn't any kind of scientific issue with my faith if I was a Christian, if I embraced Christianity.
It amazes me how many people that come from a scientific background and come into Christianity, when I hear those stories from people who are actually educated in the scientific fields, how much they laud the accuracy of Genesis and the other creation accounts, as opposed to sometimes those of us who don't come from a scientific background I find a lot of people doing almost mental gymnastics to try and find ways to make things fit and to move. And whereas I hear so many people that come from your background saying, no, it's extremely accurate. So I find that interesting. I do want to hop into the conversation today. The last time I saw you was at the National Conference for Christian Apologetics here in Charlotte, so right up the road from where I'm at. And you were doing a presentation on your book, Humans 2.0. And I've got my copy right here. I listened to your presentation. I read the book. I thought, man, there are so many amazing, wonderful technologies. We are headed into a beautiful world. In fact, you started your presentation talking about a lady who, through these biomedical advances, had done great things with composing music. Can you share that with my listeners?
Sure. And what the person you're referring to is Rosemary Johnson, who was a classical violinist who was with the Welsh National Opera Orchestra, and essentially as a young lady was just really a precocious talent. And her musical career was cut short due to an automobile accident that left her in a coma for a number of months. And when she came out, she was in effect a quadriplegic, and unable to communicate, was locked in. And through the development of brain-computer interfaces, a neuroscientist at Plymouth University developed a means by which she could, through her thoughts, direct direct or control software that allowed her to compose music, and then also to direct the play of musicians during the course of a performance. And so this unleashed her abilities to live as a musician through these amazing technologies, these brain-computer interface technologies. And these technologies are going to revolutionize how we treat not only people that are unable to communicate because of a brain injury or some kind of disease that keeps them locked in, but also that this technology can be used to teach amputees how to control prosthetic robotic limbs. They can be used to have quadriplegic and paraplegic patients control exoskeletons, giving them motion and movement. And there's even work now showing that through these brain-computer interfaces, you can actually arrest the symptoms of Parkinson's and improve memory and cognition.
Wow.
in patients with Alzheimer's and dementia. And so this is just the tip of the iceberg. So it's a really exciting time when we think about the real progress that's being made through the use of these electronic devices that pick up electrical activity in the brain and then allow the user to either direct and manipulate that activity in such a way as to control computer software or hardware, or even more sophisticated brain-computer interfaces that have, machine learning algorithms that interpret electrical activity as user intent and then can communicate that to electronic devices. Also, the information goes the other way too, where information from the environment can be converted into electrical activity that can be fed to the brain, and the user's brain learns to interpret that activity as information. And so it's a two-way interaction between device and human.
When I hear that, I hear all these amazing things that come from that. And life goes on. Don't think a whole lot about it. I think, okay, he's out there thinking 20 years in the future. That's nice. Good book. I enjoyed it. I even raised the question with some of my pastoral friends, and what I discovered really kind of alarmed me, because even though at that point I was thinking we're maybe a decade or two out, I was surprised that I didn't hear a lot of people that were giving any thought to the ethics of what was coming, to what this really looked like for humans and Christians and so on and so forth. And then I hear a name that we've heard again and again and again, Elon Musk. And so at this point, whenever Elon Musk is doing something, the world pays attention. If Elon Musk, changes, if he puts Bitcoin in his Twitter profile, the company it gains 10% or whatever. Sometimes I wonder if he's not just a guy that likes to blow rockets up and he's got a lot of money and so he does it on TV. But no, he's obviously a lot of incredible things happening with Elon Musk, but he started talking about something called Neuralink. And when he started talking about Neuralink, my thought went back to you and to your work. So tell me, what is this Neuralink technology and how does that connect to kind of what you were talking about?
Yeah. Well, in a sense, what Elon Musk is trying to do with his company Neuralink, which is founded in 2016, is essentially develop neural implants, which would be another way of describing brain-computer interfaces. And what Elon Musk is trying to do is develop the next generation of these BCIs. The technology as it exists currently is in prototype format, where people are really exploring proof of principle. And there's some real limitations with the technology. As exciting as the potential uses are, there's some very real limitations. So Elon Musk is trying to overcome those limitations with the next generation of neural implants. But what's interesting is that while most people that work in this area are primarily motivated for, let's say, humanitarian reasons, where they really see this as a very important biomedical tool, Elon Musk is, being a futurist, is, casting a vision for the future with SpaceX and Tesla, is thinking that maybe these neural implants represent, the next generation of interfaces between humans and electronic devices. So instead of using voice commands with these brain-computer interfaces, we could just use thought commands to control electronic devices. And so that's an advance in technology. But interestingly enough, when you dig beneath the surface and really hear and read what Elon Musk says in contemplative moments, his real undergirding motivation for Neuralink is actually trying to essentially overcome what he sees to be maybe the biggest existential threat to humanity, and that's essentially the emergence of AI systems, where he fears that in the future and in the near future, AI systems will surpass human cognitive abilities. And when that happens, his concern is that these AI systems could actually become kind of like the overlords of humanity, really subjugating humanity, or even one step further, essentially eliminating or driving humanity to extinction. And so he's got a very dark, pessimistic vision for what AI technology actually can do for humanity. It's not this optimistic view, it's a very pessimistic view. So his view is that these neural implants are going to be the only way in which we're going to be able to compete with AI. Because if these neural implants are sophisticated enough, it means that we can then integrate the human mind and computer systems into these very powerful cognitive systems that essentially could outcompete AI systems. So his real motivation is ultimately an existential threat. And he has, in effect, become a transhumanist, where he sees our survival as a species being linked to integrating these, integrating the human mind with computer systems.
I've heard the idea of AI being an existential threat. That's been being touted more and more. Now, as Christians, we obviously have an eschatology that leads us to one conclusion. But do you see, as AI continues to rise, is there a point that you look and you go, hey, maybe there is this struggle of self-aware systems against humanity? And can that even fit into Christian eschatology?
Yeah, well, I question if we're ever going to be able to produce a truly sentient, autonomous, self-aware AI system. But it doesn't mean that AI systems couldn't necessarily pose a real threat to humanity, even if it wasn't sentient. So, for example, you could have a very sophisticated AI system that makes use of machine learning, and through that machine learning algorithm, deems humanity to be a threat, right? Or sees it necessary to remove a certain segment of the human population, maybe to control overpopulation or to manage available resources on the planet. And if it's given enough control, and it's integrated enough into the operation of essential services, you could easily see, even if it wasn't sentient, something like that actually going awry. And so I think this, and if we're not able to cognitively keep up with it, then I could easily see why Elon Musk would have some kind of concern, about these kind of systems that could essentially run amok, whether they're sentient or not truly sentient. So, I don't think Elon Musk is completely out of bounds, I think, expressing these concerns. It's very clear he also has a particular worldview that is probably more materialistic than anything else. I don't particularly know his philosophical or religious orientation, but it seems to me that he's operating within something very akin to a materialistic worldview, where he does view the brain as being equivalent to the mind. He thinks of the brain as hardware, memory as being essentially a storage system, where those memories can be retrievable, just like you would retrieve data off of a hard drive. And so that's a materialistic view of human nature, where that kind of view of the brain and the mind and memory and cognitive processes would allow for a seamless integration between the brain of humans and a computer system. So it is a particular worldview that I think would reject substance dualism, would reject probably the idea that there's an immaterial nature to humanity, that what we perceive as our soul is really just an emergent property, or in effect, the brain functioning is just essentially neurochemistry.
He's coming from that materialistic view. And as a Christian, obviously my view is that there is something that goes beyond the material, okay? But there is still this struggle. And I'm sure that, when I read material from people such as yourself that are highly educated in these fields, and we try to put our finger on that mind-brain connection, where is that ethereal line between the two? There is a quote in your book. You mention the idea that we are a few decades from bypassing the need for a biological body. And I think the quote said, from bypassing the need for a biological body by uploading minds to computers. Now, is that a pipe dream, or is that, how do we, the idea of uploading a mind to a computer, obviously we're not uploading a soul, but is the idea of some level of consciousness and memories being uploaded to a computer, is that really the future?
Well, again, as somebody who holds to a Christian worldview, I would be skeptical if we would be able to do that. And the fact of the matter is, right now, we don't understand what consciousness is. We don't understand even the neural substrate for thoughts. We don't understand, what really constitutes memories. It doesn't mean that we can't detect electrical activity in the brain when people are thinking. So we can tell that people are thinking, but we can't tell what they're thinking from the neurochemistry. We can tell that memories are being encoded, but we can't tell what those memories are or how those memories are actually retrieved. And this opens up the possibility that maybe there is this interface and this interplay between an immaterial mind in a physical brain that creates some kind of functional unit that really defines who we are as human beings. So I think that the science doesn't rule that out as being a way to understand humanity. And it's hard to argue also that the science supports, the idea that the brain and the mind are, again, equivalent. So I'm skeptical that this is going to be possible. But when you see the types of advances that happen with brain-computer interfaces, even up to this point, and some of the work that Elon Musk is doing to create the new and improved version of brain-computer interfaces, for some people that are materialistic in their worldview, that actually encourages them to think that maybe something like this could actually be possible. I think we want to avoid the mistake of saying, hey, as human beings, we're just a ghost in the machine if we hold to substance dualism, right? We really aren't it's not a soul rattling around in a physical body, but rather our physical and our spiritual natures are integrated. That seems to me to be what Scripture is
Sure.
teaching. And so because of that, I think it may be possible that maybe our thoughts or our memories could be one day encoded in a physical format other than our brain, right? I don't think that is out of the question that something like that could happen, even if you hold to a substance dualist view. I wouldn't close the door on that being a possibility.
We obviously see the positives that can come out of this, whether it be in someone composing music, someone controlling a prosthetic limb, these brain computer interfaces, huge part of our future. That being said, seeing the idea of the dangers or the ethical risks moving forward, is this something that we should be stepping back from, or should we be embracing this idea of interfacing the mind with the electronics around us?
Yeah, this is really the complexity of the ethical issues surrounding these kind of technologies. And honestly, good people can take very differing perspectives on this, and even people that share the same worldview because of the complexity of the ethical issues. I tend to be somebody who thinks that we ought to proceed with some kind of caution, but proceed with developing these technologies because of the enormous potential benefits that these technologies can provide. But as the more that I'm learning about brain-computer interfaces, the more that I'm beginning to appreciate that even using them in a biomedical context raises some very sticky ethical questions. So, for example, there's real concern about the loss of human identity. As people make use of these brain-computer interfaces, there's increasing reports that people actually begin to think of these brain-computer interfaces as actually part of themselves, that they suddenly see their identity as not a biological organism, but actually as a melding of a machine and a human, right? And this ownership is good because it gives you a more seamless use of the interface to control, let's say, a robotic prosthetic limb. But at the same time, that raises some troubling questions about loss of identity. But even there's concern that these interfaces could actually alter personality. In Parkinson's patients, there's been reports that these brain-computer interfaces and the treatment provided by them that arrest Parkinson's symptoms actually lower the inhibitions of the user, and they begin to adopt much more risky behaviors. And so there's a personality change there. And then it raises questions about agency. Well, if my personality is altered and suddenly I'm engaging in risky behavior, does that mean that I'm actually giving bona fide consent to having these interfaces become part of my makeup, right? Am I really giving consent? Or, if you're looking at doing more complex control beyond what currently people are exploring, which is, manipulating a robotic limb, let's say, where you're now looking at trying to control electronic devices where you're using complex and nuanced thought. Well, under those circumstances, now it's really a collaboration between the user and the brain-computer interface, where you might even have to make use of machine learning software to learn how to extract electrical activity from the brain and interpret that as intent. Well, once you start doing that, the question becomes, well, who is actually making that decision? Is it the user? Is it the user in collaboration with the interface? Or is it the interface that's improperly interpreting intent through a flaw in the machine learning algorithm and is actually forcing the user to do something they wouldn't otherwise do? So even just in a biomedical context, there are all these really complex ethical issues that are emerging. But now, if you start thinking about the Elon Musk vision, the ethics just amplify, exponentially.
Technology has got to have a market. If it's going to be advanced, there's got to be some market has to push it. And in this case, I think obviously the medical market is there. Is there some consumer market for the Neuralink technology? What is it that's going to sell this to the average person as far as having it as part of your daily life?
Yeah, well, this is where I think if you look at Elon Musk's career in technology, where I think you begin to see consistency in his approach, because clearly very few people can afford a Tesla automobile. I've had the privilege of riding in one once, and it's an incredible machine, to be clear. But what Elon Musk is doing is, once he creates this vision for, this new type of automotive transportation, the next step is now to make it broadly accessible to the masses. With SpaceX, he's trying to commercialize space flight, right? And so with this brain-computer interface, part of their business model would be not only to develop the next generation, but then to figure out ways to make it broadly accessible to a consumer market. And so if you could think of a brain-computer interface as being like Alexa or like Siri now, there's going to be a lot of people that would love to be able to control their computer system and the gaming systems that they use, sure, right, with their thoughts alone. What a very rapid and seamless interface. So I could easily see a market for that kind of technology, where initially it's going to be early adopters who are very well-to-do that will have access to that technology. But as it becomes more and more accessible, you can suddenly see it, really having broad appeal. And so, that would then really set us up to moving towards kind of a transhumanist future, where suddenly we're going to become dependent upon brain-computer interfaces, not only for our amusement, but also for probably the work that we do, where as we work with electronic devices as part of our jobs, we're going to be at a disadvantage, or going to be even unable to enter into that job market if we don't have a brain-computer interface. Or maybe companies will provide their employees with that to improve their productivity. So I can easily envision a market emerging for something like this that is independent of the biomedical market.
What you could be dealing with, it sounds like, is something that if it were to go to mass market, you would have people that just, okay, yeah, this is really cool. I have the thought that, boy, the house is warm, and then my Google Nest starts cooling the house based on my wireless computer brain interface. A few questions come from that. Number one, you talked about productivity. So employers saying, hey, if you're going to work with this machinery, so on and so forth. I would also assume that with computer brain interfacing, there could be enhancements to the individual, maybe access to information, maybe speed of thinking. I don't know. I mean, the flow. I do remember, and perhaps you'd be more familiar with this, and if you're not, this was not part of our conversation originally, but there was some technology at one point that they were using to help train people in various scenarios. It was basically a helmet that someone would put on and some electrodes, and it would stimulate their brain. And so the reporters were using it and then going through scenarios of combat scenarios and so on and so forth. And they were performing, 60, 70, 80% better with this brain stimulation. If that becomes part of this computer brain interface, and again, I'm definitely the layperson here. What happens when when my children go to school, or when we are dealing with research or dealing with anything else? Are people with the computer brain interface going to be at an actual advantage as far as their computing power? The best way I know how to put it, their ability to actually function in perhaps a learning environment or a work environment?
Yeah, I think your point is well made, and that is that there's going to be a very real advantage, I think, to have, these kinds of, brain computer interface capabilities. For example, there's already good evidence that by stimulating certain parts of the brain, you can improve memory and cognition in Alzheimer's patients. Well, what happens when you do that same thing to somebody who has a healthy brain, right?
Yeah.
Now, do suddenly they have better recall? Do they have better capacity to think things through? Or if I can send, a mathematical problem wirelessly to a computer system that my brain is interfaced to, and it can perform those computations instantaneously and send that information back to my brain, and my brain can make sense of it or learns to make sense of it, suddenly, my ability to do instantaneous math is that's in a very convenient way, allows me to do things that other people otherwise, who wouldn't have that technology couldn't do. And so, you can begin to see how that type of technology could really create a world of have and have nots, where the people with that technology are going to be able to outcompete, those that don't have access to the technology.
Hey, More Than a Conversation listeners, I hope that you are enjoying this conversation as much as I am, and I hope that you're getting something great out of it today. I'm just wanting to jump in here in the middle to take a moment and let you know a few ways that you can help out More Than a Conversation. First, wherever you're listening, please go ahead and click that subscribe button. That will definitely help, and that'll make sure that you get all the content. Also, if you have a way to rate, if your app allows you to give a 4-star, 5-star, whatever the rating is that's the top rating, I would so appreciate if you would go ahead and drop a rating there. That's how the aggregators and the distributors rank podcasts, and the higher the ranking you give, the more ears will be able to hear these great conversations. Thanks again, and I'm hoping that today has been more than a conversation for you. Now let's get back to it.
And there's even the thought of potentially creating like brain nets, where this is the vision of Michio Kaku, the physicist. And it's not unrealistic, because people have shown in animal studies that with these brain computer interfaces, you can tether the brains of animals like rats or monkeys together. And then what let's say one rat knows, it can actually communicate to another rat. So they've done studies where two rats have their brain tethered together, where one rat knows that if I do certain actions, I can get a reward. And then he sees, and he's paired with another rat that doesn't have that training. He can actually tell the other rat what he needs to do or she needs to do in order to get the reward. And it can actually, with that ability to exchange information, suddenly communicate knowledge to this other animal. So the part of the vision is, given internet technology and Bluetooth technology, could we suddenly tether our brains together into a brain net where we're now functioning as kind of a collective, where we could maybe through that computational power solve problems or gain insights that we couldn't otherwise do. So this is again a prospect for the future. This is something that these thinkers like Elon Musk and Michio Kaku are really envisioning for the future, where the brain net is going to replace the internet.
Yeah. And so you literally, we hear the term the hive mind, but that takes hive mind to a whole new level when I guess two things come to mind though. First of all, if the computer is doing the calculations for me, am I becoming more capable, or am I as a human becoming less capable and simply more technology dependent? And obviously we could take that ad nauseum and go back and talk about calculators, which my teacher told me I'd never carry, right? And we all do. But part of it is, does that actually decrease human ability, if you will, or human knowledge, if we're just tapping into the internet of knowledge? The other part of that is, or I guess, does that create then a class of people, or does that make all of us part of a class that simply become dependent upon this brain net? I mean, at what point do we say education is more about your Neuralink upgrade than it is actually studying, if you've got access to all of these things? And is anyone thinking about those things? Are there ethicists discussing those things?
Most definitely, there are ethicists discussing those, and I think the dilemma that you're posing is really, very much central to those kind of conversations. And again, it goes back to the fact: what are we doing to ourselves as human beings? Are we fundamentally altering our identity as human beings when we begin to go down this path, right? And are we going to become so dependent upon a technology that it actually can lead to our extinction, not actually allow us to survive, better? Because this is the problem with technology, and that is that the technology that liberates us, from the shackles of physical labor or tedious tasks can actually become a taskmaster that enslaves us. I mean, and think about, the internet as an example. I can remember when the internet first, came online, and I was working in research and development at Procter and Gamble at the time, and literally you had to get a vice president to sign off to allow you to go onto the internet using a company computer, right? And now, our entire economy, our entire infrastructure is dependent upon not only computer systems, but on the internet. And if there was this electromagnetic pulse that brought the internet down, that set satellites, offline around the world, what would happen to the economy? What would happen to essential services? Suddenly, this technology that allows us to do things, at the click of a button, would essentially render us unable to function as a society. And so we've become literally a slave to the internet because we've integrated it so extensively into every facet of our existence. And so this is the real concern, I think, that you're raising. What it's even going to be more so when it comes to brain-computer interfaces, right? And if we become so dependent upon them, what does that mean in terms of, our autonomy as human beings? Are we going to be literally enslaved to the technology we produce?
If we're dealing with the possibility of literal enslavement to our technology, to this place of dependence, at some point, do we start pumping the brakes? At some point, do we go, hey, we need to stay away from this? Or as Christians, and you talked about this in your talk at the conference on Christian apologetics, you talked about how Christians sometimes we come to the conversation with the wrong premise, or we come with the wrong conclusion. So we don't want to just come and say, stay away from all technology. We don't want to become Luddites. For example, external wombs for embryos, so on and so forth. There's a positive, there's a negative, there's the idea that children become viable at an earlier age, which forces the pro-life conversation to change. But then there's negatives. Or with any of these things, there's both. So when we approach this conversation, what is the Christian asking? I feel like I'm hearing that the thing we need to be asking is, what is a human? But in your mind, how do we approach this without being tone deaf to what's actually happening, without saying, hey, we don't want any of the advancements, we don't want any of the benefits? What should our view be from someone who's dealing with this question? Where do you think we need to be coming at this from?
Yeah, well, I think this is where the Christian worldview and the system of ethics that flows out of the Christian worldview becomes so important. And also the view that Christians have of humans becomes so important, as you allude to, because, we should have a credible voice in our culture that asks the hard questions, that maybe proposes ways to use the technology to ensure the best outcome, while at the same time putting in place safeguards to prevent the unintentional misuse of the technology, the unintended consequences, or maybe even the abuse of the technology, for nefarious purposes. So I think what it means is that as Christians, we have to become really sophisticated in terms of how we think about these things, so that people respect our voice and respect our concerns. It's interesting to me because I had a chance to take part in a 3.5 hour conversation with the leaders of the U.S. Transhumanist Party on the Christianity and transhumanism. And what was remarkable to me is that there was a lot of places where the concerns that I was raising as a Christian were actually concerns that many transhumanists themselves had, even to the point where they were concerned that maybe this technology could actually cause us to lose our identity as human beings, and many saw that as being not a good thing. They shared that same concern that I have. So what that tells me is that our words of caution are going to be well received if people recognize that we also are not Luddites, as you said, but actually see value in the technology. We want to see the technology develop. We just want but we want to be, I think, aggressive about bringing a Christian worldview perspective to the table so that we ask the really hard questions that I think many people are ultimately going to appreciate, because the hard questions that we're asking are ultimately questions that relate to things like justice, like protecting the marginalized, ensuring that the dignity and the sanctity of human life. And so these are the types of questions that I think people, regardless of their worldview, are going to share with us as Christians. And so that is, if we ask the right questions, and if we, again, approach this in a thoughtful, sophisticated way, I think we can actually play a critical role in positively shaping the use of these technologies.
I had a question that came in, and Josh asks, could this all possibly be seen as going against God's original design for us? Or could this be God having given us the knowledge and ability to better ourselves? So kind of a either or there, or is it a balance of both?
Yeah, well, I think it's probably a balance of both. When I look at the commands given to humanity in Genesis 1, namely to multiply and fill the earth, subdue the earth, bring the earth under our control, to be caretakers of the planet. As you work through the implications of that, out of it flows, I think, a strong motivation and mandate for science and for technology, where I see science and technology as the means by which God has given to us to unleash his providence within the world that he's created. And so I think because of that, when we pursue science and technology, it really is, I believe, part of God's plan, where we are, functioning, if you will, as quote unquote co-creators with God, playing a role in terms of bringing order out of the chaos of the world around us. And out of that order, we become, as image bearers, lords and masters of the planet, if you will, where the idea is that insight and understanding promotes human flourishing, it minimizes human suffering. And so I see it as a gift that God has given to us. But also, I think when we look at other cautionary tales from Scripture, like the construction of the Tower of Babel, it's very clear that it's one thing to play God because we bear God's image. It's another thing to desire to take God's place. And it's a very subtle distinction, but it's essentially a tightrope that we have to walk. And so this is where I think both actually have merit, that we want to make sure that we're not going against God's design, right? That we preserve the integrity of human beings as image bearers. But it doesn't mean that we can't necessarily use technology to augment our biological capabilities, to allow us to be more productive, to minimize pain and suffering, to promote the flourishing of humanity. But we never want to lose our identity as human beings, or we never want to undermine the dignity or the value of another individual. We don't want to exploit people. These are very clear guardrails, I think, that once in place can help us navigate this ethical complexity a lot more, with greater facility.
I want to tap your brain about one other thing, and that is I want to ask you about genetic editing. A little different than the computer brain interface things we're talking about thus far, but the idea that we can edit genes for anything from physical characteristics to stopping a disease. First of all, can you just give us a brief rundown of exactly what genetic editing is, what we're using it for now, and kind of what maybe some of the possibilities are with genetic editing?
Yeah. Well, and this idea of gene editing was a long-term vision of many people working in the life sciences that was we were unable to fulfill until recently, thanks to the invention of CRISPR gene editing technology, which is a very low cost, very powerful gene editing technique that allows for precision editing of the genomes of organisms. And this can be used to correct genetic defects, which is a really exciting prospect from a biomedical standpoint, but it could also be used to alter human beings and maybe create designer babies, designer humans, or maybe even, like with brain-computer interfaces, enhance our capabilities beyond our natural biological limits. And the power of CRISPR gene editing is such that it's a readily accessible technology that many people can have access to and make use of, which is on one hand exciting, but also means that it is on the cusp of being a technology that really is unregulated and is unregulatable, and that raises a number of interesting concerns. But the point is that, gene editing technology is a way to alter our genetic makeup, and it can be used, again, for good purposes or for purposes that might give us some pause for thought.
When you say readily accessible, first of all, this genetic editing, does this have to happen at what state in an organism's life process, life cycle, does the genetic editing have to take place?
It can take place at any stage in the human life cycle. So it can be at the point of conception. You can do gene editing at that point. You can do gene editing at the embryo stage. You can do gene editing on a developing baby in the womb, and even on the adult. And so it can be done at any stage in development. Now, the long-term consequences or impact of that gene editing is going to vary from stage to stage in the life of the individual. So if you want to make permanent genetic alterations, you would have to do that at the embryo stage. But if you wanted to do temporary genetic alterations, which would be ideal for treating diseases, that could be done at the adult stage.
So someone has, say, a cancer, and I don't want to pin you down on the scientific side here, but someone has a disease, we go in flip a genetic switch, that treats the disease, that works for an adult. Whereas if I want to change the height, the muscle build, whatever of a human, I'm going to have to do that at the embryo stage. Is that correct?
Most likely, although it is possible that you could actually enhance the strength of an individual even at the adult stage. There's some ideas that people have as to how you could pull something like that off, where you could augment a person's strength through gene editing. A lot of it depends on how effectively you can deliver the gene editing package to the right tissues and things like that. But there is actually ways you could do that.
So eventually, instead of steroids, you just go get your genetic makeup changed, I guess could be the thought. So now in the womb, though, could I possibly change the genetics of a child to stop a debilitating lifelong disease?
Yes.
And so I guess that could be the positives.
Right. Yeah. Now, there's all kinds of ethical issues that arise when you start thinking about doing that, because it involves essentially the need for in vitro fertilization and then embryo selection and things like that. So there are some very significant pro-life issues with that particular approach to gene editing. Gene editing at the adult level, or even with a child under development in the womb, it typically doesn't have the same kind of pro-life ethical baggage with it, because you're really targeting particular tissues, and you're not needing to create and then select and destroy embryos, but rather, you're treating the developing fetus, or you're treating the adult.
Now,
Right.
Speaking of going through that life cycle, I've got two daughters. I have a 6-year-old. I have a 4-year-old. Recently, there was an article I came across that mentioned the life of a little girl was going to be longer than ever. In your book, Humans 2.0, by the way, for those of you that are watching, you need to get a copy of Humans 2.0, and those that later on are listening to this in podcast format. In the book, you talk about, I believe it's telomere editing that deals with or treatment, or however you can correct my verbiage on that again. Talking about aging, are we going to be able, not only are we going to have longer life cycles based upon just general technology, health, knowledge, all those things that are happening, nutrition, so on and so forth. In addition to that, we have an ability now through these biomedical upgrades to extend life. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, this idea of anti-aging technology is a very real prospect now, where a number of thinkers in this area have proposed ways in which we could dramatically extend human life expectancy. One is through editing of telomere length, as you're pointing out. There's other approaches that people have proposed. And in fact, just recently, there's been a couple of papers published where people have done studies using different approaches to anti-aging, where they literally caused a reversal in the aging process in the test subjects, so that the subjects, after going through a year of treatments with this anti-aging technology, had a biological age that was 2 years younger than their chronological age. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. So it very well could be that in the near future, we can actively intervene and to either arrest or reverse the aging process. And of course, that raises all kinds of interesting, ethical questions as well. But when you combine kind of the brain-computer interface technology with gene editing, with anti-aging technology, there really now is a suite of techniques that are available to people that could dramatically extend life expectancy and could even, enhance our capabilities beyond our biological limits. I mean, in a sense, perhaps the greatest biological limitation we all face is the fact that we age and that we'll eventually die. It's our own, mortality. And so with this technology, there's not only the prospect of maybe technological invention of our own making, but that we might even be able to attain a practical type of immortality. And for many people that espouse transhumanism, that's the ultimate end game, is that this could essentially bring about the end of the ultimate pain and suffering we all endure, which is our death, our impending death.
Now, as believers, we obviously have a worldview that tells us that's not going to happen. However, somewhere in that pursuit, it seems as if what I'm hearing is we could end up, and most likely divided along economic lines, of a group of people who are advantaged physically, advantaged with length of life. I mean, if you add 20 years to your life, you can instantly earn more money, pass on more. Now your children have more, they're more. We could really be coming into some very deep issues in the days ahead. And guys, you need to get a copy of Humans 2.0. You need to get over to the Reasons to Believe, reasons.org. Get over to the website. You can also, I'm sure this book's available on Amazon. They haven't it hasn't been part of the digital book burning yet. But get over to Amazon, get a copy of Humans 2.0. I promise you, when you listen to the scientist from Reasons to Believe, You can often think, wow, these subjects are going to be beyond me. But they have a great team of people that make all of these topics very approachable, very understandable. These books they will withstand scrutiny from those of you that are more academic in your reading. But for those of us that are in the popular audience, you will find all these subjects to be made quite approachable. And in fact, what's unique about Humans 2.0 is there are entire parts of the book that are dedicated to the ethical questions of what's coming down the line. So you need to get a copy of Humans 2.0. I want to close with this. In the garden, we're told that there's this tree and it'll make you like gods. And I see so much of that. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Well, I suppose we've got that on our devices now. We've got the knowledge. Naivete is gone. Innocence is disappearing. I see something in that story where when Eve encounters the serpent, Eve says, I was told not to touch the tree. And of course, it's been opined about much that it doesn't seem like God ever said don't touch. God said don't eat. But somewhere there was a limit put on that maybe was to be a protection. And who knows whether that ended up working out and exacerbating the situation because she had crossed a line she thought was there and then went further. Nonetheless, people like you, Dr. Rana, are on the edge of this thing. You're looking ahead. You're trying to see what's coming. I know that I'm going to suggest to everyone again to buy Humans 2.0, to get over to Reasons, follow the information. But what does the average person need to be doing when they get done listening to this podcast? What do they need to be thinking? What does their eye need to be on as we move forward? What would you give to them?
Yeah, well, to me, I think we don't want to create a spirit of fear in people where they dread what's coming in the future, but really we want to create a sense of excitement that there's great and wonderful things awaiting us and that those are going to be coming from technology developments. But we also need to recognize, too, that we no longer can just simply sit on the sidelines and let technology happen. We've got to actively engage with those people that are in our sphere of influence and really highlight, I think, the concerns that we have, but also make sure people understand really how excited we are. We want to be thoughtful, and we want to engage in a sophisticated and a credible way. But I think also we all want to make sure that we recognize that ultimately what's undergirding many of these advances is really a desire to bring about the end of pain and suffering, to see humans flourish. There's a desire for a utopian type of future. We recognize that death is not natural, that we want something beyond this life. And these are the things that the Christian faith promises us. And it can be found through the person of Christ. So in many respects, ironically, these kind of futuristic advances actually make the gospel more credible, not less credible, more relevant, right. Not less relevant. And I think it becomes incumbent upon us as Christians to be able to articulate the real hope that we have through what the gospel offers us, because that's what people are ultimately seeking in all of this, is really a sense of hope, purpose, and destiny. And it's never going to be found in technology, but it will be found in the person of Christ. And so I see this as a golden opportunity for the Christian worldview to be relevant and to be impactful in ways that go beyond what its impact has been throughout human history up to this point.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Before you go, can you tell us where can people follow you? What social media can they follow you on? Where can they get more of your work?
Yeah, well, if you go to reasons.org, of course, that's the website for the organization that I work for. You can get a lot of material about RTB and a lot of science faith material in general. Also, I'm on social media, Facebook and on Twitter, so you can follow me, you can like me, and all those different verbs that you do on social media.
Absolutely. And here's the cool thing about following Dr. Rana, and the same thing with Dr. Ross, is every once in a while you can just share something from them, and it makes all your friends think you're much more intelligent than you are because you share from these guys and their experience. So let me say this too, guys. Get a copy of Humans 2.0. I've read it. It's incredible. I've also read Who Was Adam, and we'll have to talk about that one in another podcast. But guys, one other thing that is important to remember, in order for us to be able to be having these conversations, there has to be support for organizations like reasons.org, or for reasons to believe that you can find at reasons.org. There has to be income. There has to be people giving. They are not going to have great big endowments coming into their research. They are not going to have tax funds coming to support their research. And what is so important is, as we move forward, we have people who are credible, people who are trained, people who are equipped, people who are educated at the highest levels that can have real, credible conversations and get to the table, but also are believers. And so if I can encourage you not just to buy the books, but to make contributions to organizations like Reasons to Believe that are doing this work in the era we are in, we need that information and they need your support. And although Dr. Rana may not come on and ask for your support, I know that they would be happy to have it. And anything you can do to help at this point, we as believers, those of you that have a biblical worldview that listen, I know that there's many of you that listen that don't. But those of you that do, and even if you say, hey, I'm not a Christian, if you're concerned about the ethics of these things that are coming down the line, understand that Christian ethicists, those from a Judeo-Christian background, a lot of things that come out of the sacred world will also be of great benefit to you in the secular world. So please do all you can to help out with that. Again, Dr. Rana, thank you so much for joining me today. I do so appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me, Pat. It's been great.
And to everyone else, I hope that today has proven to be more than a conversation for you. Thanks again for being part of More Than a Conversation today. If you'd like more content like this, check out my blog at www.pastorconley.com. That's PastorConley.com. Again, that's PastorConley.com. I'd also love to see you join us in worship at Garden Sanctuary. If you're ever in Rock Hill, South Carolina, or the greater Charlotte area, we'd love to have you stop by and worship with us. Check us out at www.gardensanctuary.org. That's gardensanctuary.org. Until next time, I hope this has been more than a conversation.